The great warlords of the galaxy thought they had it all figured out. After centuries of conquest, they perfected the art of warfare, creating machines and beasts far beyond anything humanity could dream of. They ruled over countless star systems, their enemies crushed under the weight of their unrelenting might. But there was one mistake they never saw coming, one that would shatter their illusion of invincibility. It began with the war beasts, genetically engineered monstrosities bred for one purpose: to wage war. Towering, terrifying creatures with brutal strength and instincts honed to perfection, these beasts were meant to be the galaxy's ultimate weapon. The decision was made. Humanity, just a fledgling species in their eyes, would be the perfect test subject. If these creatures could break humans, then nothing in the galaxy would ever stand a chance against their might. But they underestimated one thing: humans are not so easily broken. The war beasts were unleashed, expecting a swift, brutal victory. But as the massive creatures stormed Earth, they encountered something they were not prepared for: resistance. Not just from armies or weapons, but from the spirit of humanity itself. Every strike they delivered was met with unwavering defiance. Every roar of destruction echoed into the abyss, only to be answered by the resilience of a species that had learned how to survive the harshest of conditions. From the heart of the chaos, one human stood tall, a leader, unremarkable in appearance, but extraordinary in will. With every step, the commander learned how to turn the tide of battle. The war beasts, once thought to be unstoppable, began to falter. The invaders had underestimated the most crucial factor: the human heart, a force of determination and willpower that could never be predicted. As the battle raged on, the invaders began to question their own strategies. The war beasts, supposed to be the ultimate weapon, were now being hunted. They were losing, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The very foundation of their dominance was beginning to crack, and their greatest strength was turning into their biggest weakness. But the warlords would not concede. As their beasts faltered, they turned to their most terrifying resource: technology so advanced it made the war beasts seem like children's toys. A new weapon, far worse than anything before, was on its way. And this time, it wasn't just Earth that was in danger. The tension was rising, and the stakes were greater than ever. Humanity had fought back against impossible odds, but the enemy was not finished yet. And in the dark void of space, a new plan was set in motion, one that would take the battle to a level humanity had never seen before. Would the war beasts be humanity's final test? Or would they become a stepping stone to something far worse? The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and the clock was ticking. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie orange glow over the battlefield, the leader of humanity stood on the front lines, eyes fixed on the horizon. It had been weeks since the war beasts first landed on Earth, and what had started as a desperate defense had become something more. Every corner of the planet felt the tremors of battle, from the cities to the remote deserts. But amid the chaos, a strange thing had happened. Humanity had begun to adapt. The initial shock of the war beasts' assault had been overwhelming. Their brute strength, their impenetrable armor, and their insatiable hunger for destruction left entire regions in ruins. Governments, military forces, and civilians alike scrambled to fight back, but it seemed as if every countermeasure was met with force stronger than the last. At first, it was hard to see a way out. Yet, as the weeks passed, humanity did what it always did best: survive. It started with the small victories: a single soldier who, against all odds, managed to strike down one of the war beasts. It wasn't a decisive blow, but it sent a message. It wasn't just the soldiers in combat that began to change. Ordinary citizens who had never held a weapon in their hands rallied together, sharing knowledge, pooling resources, and even engineering their own devices to turn the tide. Every battle became a test of ingenuity, determination, and heart. But there was something deeper at play. The war beasts weren't the only weapon humanity was up against. The invaders themselves, the so-called galactic warlords, were a mysterious and elusive presence. No one had ever seen their leaders, only their soldiers, their technology, and their horrific creations. The war had turned into a battle not just for survival, but for knowledge. Every piece of alien tech captured, Every scrap of intel gathered was crucial in understanding the enemy. There were whispers among humanity's leaders. What if this invasion was just the beginning of something far worse? The more they learned, the clearer it became this war was not a simple conquest. The war beasts were part of a much larger plan, one that reached into the farthest corners of the galaxy. Humanity wasn't just fighting to protect Earth, they were fighting for their place in the cosmos. If the invaders succeeded, humanity would be erased, and the galaxy would fall under the control of a power unlike anything ever seen before. With every passing day, the leaders' understanding grew. They were no longer just coordinating troops and strategies. They were seeking a way to outsmart the invaders, to understand their weaknesses, to uncover what drove them. The war beasts had been a test, but the real weapon was yet to come. Humanity had become something more than the invaders had bargained for, but so had their enemies. As the leaders stared out into the night, a thought gnawed at them. Were the war beasts a true weapon, or just a distraction? What if there was something more waiting, hidden in the depths of space, something far more dangerous than anything the humans had seen so far? And why did it feel like the war beasts were growing stronger, adapting to every tactic the humans threw at them? In the darkness, the silence was broken only by the distant rumble of an approaching storm. But it wasn't a natural storm. The leader could feel it in their bones. The atmosphere was charged with the hum of something far more unsettling. The ground trembled. It wasn't the war beasts. It was something else, something far more terrifying. A new wave of fear swept through the camp. A strange energy, pulsing, vibrating, almost like a warning. And in the distance, the sky seemed to shimmer, a faint but undeniable ripple through the air, like the calm before the storm. Just then, a transmission crackled through the communicator, a voice distorted by static. "They're coming." But what exactly was coming? And were the war beasts just the beginning? The transmission echoed through the communication center, cutting through the tense silence that had gripped the base. "They're coming." The voice, muffled and strained, sent a ripple of unease through the ranks. The leader, standing frozen in the command room, could feel the weight of those two words pressing down on them like an impending storm. But who were they? And why did the voice sound so certain, so terrified? Outside, the atmosphere seemed to hum with a strange, unnatural energy, as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched thin. The leader's mind raced. They knew the war beasts weren't the final challenge, but they hadn't prepared for this. Something was coming, something worse than the monstrous creatures, something more alien, more dangerous. And no one knew exactly what it was. Meanwhile, in the depths of the underground research labs, a team of scientists worked tirelessly to decipher the alien tech that had been recovered. Among them was a brilliant but eccentric researcher. She had been obsessed with the invaders from the very beginning, her mind consumed with understanding how the war beasts functioned, how they were bred, and what hidden secrets lay in the alien technology. Her colleagues, however, had begun to grow uneasy. Their initial curiosity had shifted toward fear. Every new discovery seemed to unlock something darker, something more incomprehensible. What they had found so far pointed to one horrifying conclusion: the war beasts were not the end of the invasion, they were just the beginning. The researcher had made a breakthrough, discovering a pattern in the genetic makeup of the war beasts. The creatures were part of an experimental process that involved harnessing human DNA. At first, she had believed it to be a coincidence, a random alteration made by the invaders' twisted science. But after countless hours of analysis, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The war beasts were designed to study humanity, to learn its strengths and weaknesses, and from there, the invaders could create something far more insidious. In the research room, she stood over a glowing data screen, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the data. She had found something, a message encoded deep within the genetic code of the war beasts. A warning. A message that told of a greater war coming from the depths of space. A war that would not only threaten Earth, but the entire galaxy. The leader had to know about this, but getting the message to them, in the chaos of the battlefield, would be no easy task. Back on the front lines, the situation was growing dire. The war beasts had retreated into the shadows, seemingly regrouping. But it wasn't just them, there were whispers, sightings of strange, shadowy figures appearing at the edges of the battlefield, figures that didn't belong. Were they enemies? Allies of the invaders? Or something entirely different? Soldiers reported hearing low, guttural growls, not from the war beasts, but from somewhere else, something more intelligent, more coordinated. The creatures seemed to be evolving, adapting to every counterattack the humans launched. As the leader prepared to make a move, a soldier burst into the command room, eyes wide with panic. The scanners picked up something. A massive ship bigger than anything we've seen before. It's coming straight for us. A chill ran down the leader's spine. This was it, the thing that had been lurking just beyond their understanding. Whatever it was not just a ship. It was an invader. The war had taken a new, terrifying turn, and the humans had no way of knowing how deep the enemy's influence truly reached. As the wind outside picked up, the sky beginning to darken with the threat of a new storm, the researchers' urgent message finally made its way to the leader's hands. They read it quickly, heart pounding. The war beasts are not the enemy. They are tools to soften us up. Something far worse is coming. The leader stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the message. A deep, unsettling silence fell over the base. The enemy had already infiltrated their world in ways they never imagined, and the war beasts were merely a taste of what was to come. And now, with a massive alien ship closing in on Earth, the question wasn't just how to fight, but whether humanity could survive what was on its way. The leader turned to face their officers, but before they could speak, the ground beneath them rumbled violently. The transmission came through again, but this time it wasn't a voice. It was a sound, a vibration deep within their bones, a low, resonating hum, like the roar of an ancient creature awakening. And then, in the distance, the sky flashed bright, too bright to be natural, a flash that illuminated the horizon like the wrath of some forgotten god. Something was coming. And they were no longer just fighting for Earth, they were fighting for everything. But against what? And would they be ready when it arrived? The leader stood motionless as the hum in the air deepened, vibrating the very ground beneath their feet. Something was coming, something immense. The massive alien ship was no longer a distant threat. It was almost on them. The sky had turned an unnatural shade of red, casting an eerie glow over the war-torn landscape. In the distance, soldiers scrambled to reinforce their positions, but they could already feel it. They were no longer prepared for what awaited them. Inside the command center, the tension was palpable. Officers and strategists were frantically poring over data, but nothing made sense. Scanners showed no traditional patterns, no known ships, no signs of conventional weaponry. Only the strange pulsing energy growing stronger by the second. The leader knew something deeper was at play, something the scientists hadn't fully grasped. The war beasts were only the surface, whatever was approaching was the true enemy. Something far more sophisticated, more deadly. The researchers' warning echoed in the leader's mind. The war beasts are not the enemy. They are tools to soften us up. And now, the real war had arrived. But in the quiet between moments of chaos, one question continued to haunt them. What was the enemy planning? They had been playing a game of defense, reacting to every assault. Now, the stakes were different. The invaders were no longer concerned with Earth, they were concerned with ending humanity. Out in the trenches, soldiers gathered their weapons, their eyes sharp and determined, but there was a new sense of fear behind their movements. Fear of the unknown. Fear of an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't understand. For weeks, they had fought the war beasts, learning their tactics, their movements, and yet now there was nothing to learn. The invaders had adapted, and they were no longer fighting monsters, they were fighting an entire species whose intelligence was far beyond anything humanity had encountered before. The leader turned to their officers, eyes grim. "We can't wait any longer. Prepare for an assault. It's coming, and we have no choice but to face it head-on." But even as the orders were being given, the soldiers' uneasy whispers filled the air. "What if we're not ready?" one asked, voice barely audible. "What if this isn't just another enemy but the enemy?" A massive thunderclap rang out across the sky, startling everyone. The ground trembled again, But this time it wasn't just a rumble, it was a force, something immense, drawing closer with every second. The alien ship had arrived, and it wasn't alone. The war beasts, seemingly retreating into the shadows, suddenly emerged again, but this time they were different. They were moving in ways that weren't natural, as though they were being controlled. Something or someone was guiding them. In the command center, the scientist who had uncovered the truth about the war beasts finally managed to reach the leader. Breathless, her face pale, she handed over a new set of findings. "I've seen this before," she said, her voice shaking. "They're not just genetically engineered beasts, they're programmed." The leader stared at her, trying to process her words. "What do you mean, programmed?" "They're more than just weapons," she said, her eyes wide with realization. "They're linked to something, someone. The invaders have control over them, a central consciousness that directs their actions. And if this ship is what I think it is, it's not a battlecruiser. It's their central hub. The warlords themselves, they're here." The leader felt their stomach drop. The war beasts were just the tip of the iceberg. The true threat was here, and it was far worse than anyone could have imagined. The invaders had brought their war straight to Earth's doorstep, and they had never planned on losing. Outside, the sky began to crack open with a flash of light. The energy from the approaching ship had reached its peak, and the ground split beneath the soldiers' feet. A monstrous form emerged from the ship, towering over the land like a giant looming over its prey. It was the commander of the invaders, their true leader, unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The war beasts howled in unison, their voices now distorted, eerie. As they surged toward the humans, it was clear this wasn't just a battle for survival. This was the fight, the moment that would decide the fate of Earth. But something was off. The soldiers felt it in their bones, that strange, unsettling vibration that came not from the ground but from within them. A kind of mind that whispered, "We are not the ones in control." The leader's heart pounded as they made their way to the front lines. Everything they had fought for, every strategy they had developed, every small victory, they all led to this moment. But even as they prepared to give everything, they knew the enemy was far more than they'd expected. And just as the first wave of alien forces began to charge, the sky split open with a blinding flash, and everything went dark. What was coming next would shake the very foundations of everything humanity thought they knew. The battle for Earth had just begun, but the real war was about to begin, and no one knew who would be left standing when it was over. The flash of blinding light that swallowed everything left only darkness, as if the very fabric of reality had been torn apart. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but silence. No sounds of battle, no alarms, no cries. Just an unsettling quiet that seemed to stretch on indefinitely. And then, without warning, the darkness gave way to a strange, flickering light faint, like a dying star struggling to hold on. The leader, disoriented and struggling to steady themselves, tried to make sense of their surroundings. The soldiers around them were in the same state, dazed, unsure of where they were or what had happened. The ground beneath them felt unstable, shifting as though they were standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. But then the voice came cold, calm, and unmistakably alien. It echoed through the darkness, reverberating in their minds like a command given by an invisible force. "You've been waiting, but it's not the end." The leader's breath caught in their throat. This wasn't a voice from the invader's ship, nor from the war beasts. This voice felt different, almost human and yet not. It carried an ancient weight, as though it had existed long before the war had begun. The voice wasn't meant to comfort. It was meant to confuse, to shake them from the certainty they had held just moments before. "Who are you?" the leader demanded, their voice hoarse. But there was no answer. Instead, the darkness before them seemed to ripple, as if it were made of liquid, and in its shifting depths, an image began to form. The leader's heart raced as they tried to make sense of it, distant stars, nebulae, and vast ships moving like shadows. But there was something else, something worse. A figure, half-formed, standing at the center of this cosmic display, as if it were observing them. The figure was cloaked in a swirling, impenetrable fog, and yet its presence felt undeniable, suffocating. You've played their game, the voice continued, now more sinister. But this war was never theirs to win. The leaders' blood ran cold. They didn't understand. How could this be possible? Everything they knew, every battle, every sacrifice had been for Earth, for survival. Yet, it seemed as though all their efforts had been carefully orchestrated. The war beasts, the invasion, the mysterious ship, it was all part of a larger plan, but not the plan they thought it was. This wasn't the end. It was a setup. A test. But for what? The strange figure in the vision began to fade, leaving only the image of a vast, darkened city floating amidst a sea of stars. A structure, alien and ancient, loomed over everything, its architecture too complex, too refined for anything human to comprehend. And then came the revelation that would alter everything. This war, the voice intoned, was never meant for you. You are not the first to face them. You are the latest. Experiment. The weight of the words hit like a tidal wave. The war beasts weren't the true invaders. The galactic warlords were not the true architects of the war. They, the figure in the vision, the shadowy presence, were not even the ultimate power behind the invasion. The war beasts had been their minions, the destruction on Earth, nothing more than a calculated trial run. Humanity wasn't the first species to be tested. No, they were just the latest to be part of something much darker, something far more insidious. Earth, their very home, had become a laboratory. An arena for something that spanned across galaxies, a war that had been fought for eons, and humanity, by mere chance, had become its latest subject. The ground beneath the leader's feet shifted again, but this time it wasn't the trembling of an alien force. It was the tremor of a realization. The figure had faded, but its words lingered like a curse. The leader stumbled back, eyes wide in disbelief, as the soldiers around them began to look uneasy, glancing nervously at one another. What did this mean? Who had been watching them? Who had been pulling the strings from the shadows? A sudden flash of light erupted from the alien ship on the horizon, as if in answer to their question. And from that flash, something new emerged, something far more terrifying than the war beasts, something that defied every understanding they had of life and death. It was a form that couldn't be described in human terms, a creature that seemed to exist between the cracks of reality itself. The soldiers raised their weapons, but the leader knew it wouldn't be enough. They were staring down the true enemy now, and nothing in their arsenal, no strategy or technology, would ever be enough to stop it. But there was one final, terrifying truth they hadn't yet learned. The real battle hadn't even begun. The air was thick with tension as the monstrous shape in the distance grew closer, its edges flickering like a mirage in a heat wave. The leader's heart pounded in their chest as they stood at the edge of the battlefield, surrounded by soldiers whose faces mirrored their fear. The alien ship loomed overhead, casting an unnatural shadow that stretched across the ground, swallowing everything in its path. Whatever this was, whatever it wanted, humanity was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their very existence. Hold the line, the leader shouted, rallying the soldiers, their voice cutting through the chaos. But it wasn't the sound of their voice that spurred them on. It was the realization that they had no choice. There was nothing left to do but fight. The creature in the sky now began to descend, an otherworldly hum vibrating through the air. It was more than just a ship. It was a living, breathing entity, its form shifting and warping in ways that defied nature. The ground trembled beneath its power as it landed with an earth-shattering impact. The war beasts, once mere foot soldiers, now seemed like mere insects in comparison to the behemoth that stood before them. As the soldiers braced for impact, the figure from the vision, now more defined than ever, emerged from the ship, towering above them. Its body was an amalgamation of sleek metal and organic matter, moving with an eerie fluidity. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with a cold, unfeeling light. And then, without a word, it raised one massive hand. The air around the creature seemed to warp, distorting reality itself. The very fabric of space began to crack, the sound like thunder, but quieter, more menacing. It was as if the creature was bending time and space, pulling everything into its grasp. The leader, eyes wide with horror, could only watch as the sky split open once again, revealing a vast and dark expanse, a galaxy that shouldn't exist. And then, as if to mock the human struggle, the creature spoke. "You were never meant to survive this. You were never even meant to fight." The leader's blood ran cold. The words weren't just cruel, they were damning. They were true. Everything that had happened, from the war beast to the invasion to the struggles on Earth, they had all been part of a larger design, a cosmic experiment. And humanity had been the test subjects. The war beasts, the invaders, the ships, they were just pawns in a game much older, much more vast than they had ever imagined. Earth was nothing more than a stepping stone, an insignificant piece in an eternal war that stretched across galaxies, civilizations, and millennia. But then, something unexpected happened. The leader felt a strange pull, a sudden shift in the air, as if a new presence was entering the battlefield. At first, it was subtle, a whisper of something unseen, something familiar. The soldiers glanced around, confusion and fear on their faces. And then, the realization hit them. The war beasts, once mindless killing machines, began to falter. Their movements slowed, their roars faltering. A low hum filled the air, one that resonated deep within the chest, vibrating through the ground beneath them. The creatures looked confused, as if no longer sure of their purpose. The alien leader, now visibly frustrated, raised its hand again, but it was as if something was blocking its power. The ground shifted beneath it, causing the massive creature to stumble. The ship's energy, once so overwhelming, began to flicker. Something was disrupting its control. And then, a new figure appeared at the center of the battlefield, a human, standing alone, staring directly at the alien leader. It was a figure that no one had expected, someone who had been thought lost, someone who had disappeared into the shadows. It was the scientist, the one who had uncovered the truth about the war beasts. This was never about survival, the scientist said, their voice strong, clear, and confident. It was about control. But you underestimated us. You underestimated humanity. The alien leader let out an angry, guttural growl, its eyes glowing brighter with rage. It raised its hand once more, preparing to strike, but this time, the ground beneath them shifted in response. The war beasts, now under the scientist's control, began to move in unison, breaking free from the mental chains that had once bound them. With one final push, the scientists stepped forward, their hands glowing with a strange energy. The leader watched in disbelief as the war machines turned their gaze away from humanity, now facing the invader. The air crackled with energy as the two forces collided. But then, just as the battle seemed to reach its peak, the unexpected happened. The alien leader, caught off guard by the sudden shift, looked over its shoulder, and there, standing in the distance, a new figure appeared. A massive fleet, one not of human design, but of something other. The sky trembled again as ships, unlike any the humans had ever seen, came into view. The final twist was clear. This wasn't the first time Earth had been caught in the web of an eternal war. In the final moment, the leader realized they were never meant to win. This was only the beginning, and the true enemy was still out there, waiting. The battlefield fell silent for a brief moment as the ships hovered in the air, their sleek alien designs casting shadows across the war-torn landscape. The ground, cracked and scorched from endless battles, now lay still, as if even the Earth itself was holding its breath. The newly arrived fleet was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Ships that gleamed with unfamiliar metals, their surfaces shifting in ways that defied comprehension. These weren't the invaders the humans had fought so hard to push back. They were something far more ancient, something older than the war beasts themselves. The leader, still reeling from the revelation, stood tall, eyes scanning the horizon. The scientist, now at their side, gave a quiet nod, acknowledging the shared understanding. The battle for Earth had never truly been about survival. It had always been part of a larger scheme, a test set in motion by forces beyond their control. But now, humanity had a choice. They could surrender, bow down to the eternal war that raged across the stars, or they could stand and fight, taking a stand for their planet, for their future. The war beasts, their minds now free from the alien control, circled around, uncertain but loyal. They had once been weapons, tools of destruction, but now, under the leadership of the human scientist, they had become allies. There was no time to waste. The alien fleet had come with a purpose, to finish what the war beasts had started. But this time, things were different. This time, humanity was no longer an experiment. They were a force to be reckoned with. The scientist's voice cut through the tension. We were never meant to win this battle. But we can win the war. The leader nodded, understanding the weight of the words. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. It was about more than survival. It was about reclaiming their place in the universe. No longer pawns in an endless game, humanity was now the players, ready to carve their own destiny. With a shared resolve, the human forces rallied. The remaining soldiers, the war beasts, and the scientists now at the helm of a new, powerful alliance began to strategize. The alien fleet, though powerful, was not invincible. With the knowledge they had gained through their battles and the help of the war beasts, humanity was ready to face the challenge head-on. They knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was one they had to take on. As the first ship of the new alliance launched into the sky, the leaders stood at the forefront, gazing up at the stars. They were no longer just a species struggling to survive. They were humanity, a force with the will and the strength to fight for their future. The realization settled in, the war that had ravaged their world was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. As the alien ships continued to loom, ready to strike, the leader clenched their fist, determined. We will never be their experiment again. We will fight. With that, the final battle began, not just for Earth, but for the future of every living being in the galaxy. As the war raged on in the stars, one thing was clear: humanity was no longer just another pawn in a cosmic game. They were the ones who would change the course of history. The universe had underestimated them, and now humanity was about to show just how wrong they had been. The leader's gaze hardened, and with the war beasts by their side, they prepared for the fight that would define the future of every world, every galaxy. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, and humanity was ready to lead it.